everyone. It is good to see so many of you here. Hey, if you're a guest this morning, first time, we're so excited you're here. Today, we're actually finishing up this series, Love Songs, that we've been in. And what it has been a study of this Old Testament book, this Hebrew poetry called Song of Songs, or Song of Solomon. Maybe you've heard of it that way. And it is a book that details an uncomfortable relationship between a married couple. And it is the dating phase, and it is the marriage, and it is the sexual relationship between this husband and wife. And we've been studying this. Week one, we talked about how a godly relationship means that we pursue godly things. And so right out of the gate, if we're going to claim that we have a godly relationship, then we're going to pursue things that matter to God. Last week, we had just kind of an open conversation about this couple's relationship, and we talked about how sex is not built on physical features but faithfulness. It's not built on physical features but faithfulness, and that the world tries to define sex as just this physical type thing, but there is a deeper level that God designed to be there. And today we're going to wrap this series up. But as we do, as we look at this couple, in the book of Song of Songs, no matter how good their dating was early on, no matter how many words of affirmation there was, no matter how good their sex was, as we take one step further in the book, we're going to find something that is probably common in most of our friendships, in our marriages, and it's a small little word. It's the word conflict. And no matter how good things were, there is still conflict. Even in this book where it's uncomfortable at times to read because there's so much detail of their relationship, you feel like you're just reading a Hallmark movie script. And as you do so, you get about 3/4 of the way through the book, and all of a sudden there is conflict. And really the question for us to answer this morning, there is going to be conflict in just about any relationship that we're a part of. If we're married this morning, there's going to be conflict in our marriage. You probably figured that out already. If you're not married, there's going to be conflict with friends. There's going to be conflict with coworkers. All right, there's going to be conflict in our lives. But when it happens, the question is, how do we deal with it? How do we respond to it? How do we react? What does it look like when we return a conversation in the middle of conflict? You see, because how we react and what we respond with often will help people to see who it is that we follow. And so when we respond in conflict, our response should look a little bit like Jesus. I want to pray, and we're going to jump in. God, I'm thankful for this morning. I'm thankful that we can be here and learn. God, I'm thankful to see so many people in this room, Father, with a desire to know who you are and ask questions, and Father, to smile and laugh, and that's what church is about. God, that we get to come together as broken people, as messy people, as people who don't have everything figured out. And God, we get a chance to learn about you. Because of your goodness and because of what Jesus did on the cross, God, we get this opportunity to learn. And so, Father, I pray that if we're here and we're not sure why we're here, what we believe, God, I pray that you'll speak to us and that we'll understand. God, I pray that if we had a terrible week, I pray that you will encourage us during this time. Jesus, we're thankful for your grace. It's in your name we pray. Amen. I was reading an article this past week, and it was recently put out by a research group called the Barna Group. The Barna Group is a Christian research organization that looks at all different elements of life, and one of the things that they spend time looking at often is relationship trends around culture. And so they released this article that I read through, and the name of the article was Trends Redefining Romance Today. Trends Redefining Romance Today. And some of the things that I found interesting is that cohabitation continues to rise. Adults between the ages of 25 to 29 are staying single 10% more than just a few years ago. Online dating is still not seen as a viable and credible option for dating. Although it's worked, it's still not reflected in most people's opinion. And as I read through some of these different statistics, some of them surprised me, some of them didn't, but one that kind of stopped me was this. They showed in their study and in their research of culture and people that 25% of adults, 25% of practicing Christians, and 25% of evangelicals, whoever falls in that category, which is all adults, Christians, evangelicals, 25% of all of those people, their marriages end in divorce. And as I read that, I thought to myself, man, that means that people who claim to love Jesus, people who claim that we've been forgiven by Jesus, that we're loved in a way that's different than the world, we can't seem to get it figured out to affect our marriages. It means that no matter what happens, no matter who you are, there's conflict. And as I read that statistic, I was reminded once again, just because we show up in this place, and just because we're present at church does not mean that it makes us better or makes us have things more figured out than anybody else. It gives us hope. But I have to think, I have to believe that if we're going to claim that Jesus has forgiven us, if we're going to claim grace that we don't deserve, but we've been given this forgiveness, I have to think that followers of Jesus, that those claims should affect our marriage relationship. That those claims should affect the way that we treat people. Those claims should affect the way that we date and we prepare to get married someday. If we're going to claim grace and love in a way that the outside world might not experience or expect it, then it should affect what happens in our homes. However, based on statistics, it would say that it often doesn't. And all this does is it continues to show that conflict is an issue. And that conflict creates and cultivates an absence in marriage. If you're not married this morning, I don't want you to check out. For some of us, we're going to be married someday. And what we're going to talk about will happen. I promise. Any married couple in the room will tell you that you will get in a fight with your spouse. If they say it doesn't happen, they're lying, all right? Just telling you. They are. They're in church and they're lying, which is worse. You know? Conflict is going to happen. All right, if you're not married, it might be easy to say, well, I'm not married and this doesn't apply to me, and so I'm checking out. Listen, you have a family. Someplace you have a family. You have parents, you have aunts, you have uncles. There is maybe your close friend is married. There are marriages all around you, and you can either build in or tear down to those marriages. And so don't check out. You see, as we've been studying this book of Song of Songs, everything has kind of been this blissful state until we get to chapter 5. And all of a sudden in chapter 5, there is this kind of collision where this couple, as much as they've been in love until this point, all of a sudden they hit conflict. If you brought a Bible this morning, you're welcome to open up a Song of Songs chapter 5. It'll be on the screen. You can also look it up on your phone. But as this couple, as they begin to communicate, and as in the previous chapter, we have seen a relationship between them that is emotional, it is close, it is sexual. But now into chapter 5, there is conflict that shows up. And as it shows up, to give us a little bit of understanding, we're hearing first from the voice of the man. All right, and as we hear from the voice of the man, okay, there is this understanding of this is what I'm going to get. And then, a little bit later, beginning in verse 2, okay, in verse 2, we hear the voice of the woman. And within the voice of the woman, starting in verse 2, for the next couple of verses, there's some imagery that happens. Okay, and explaining what happens, there are two different schools of thought. More or less what we get is we get this woman who is reasoning with herself of why she doesn't want to get out of bed and open a door. Okay? The husband is knocking at the door. He wants to get in the door. Okay? The wife, she is coming up with reasons why she doesn't want to get out of bed and open the door. She's already taken her robe off. She's already showered and gotten ready for bed. She's already laid down. She's comfortable. All right, and so there is this reasoning. Now, when I say there's two schools of thought, there are some people, when they read this, there's the school of thought that says he's literally at a door and she doesn't want to get out of bed and let him in. Okay? There's another school of thought, though. that the husband is wanting to have sex with his wife, and she doesn't want to. All right, and so as you read these verses, there are two schools of thought. However, no matter which school you're in, at the end of the day, she doesn't open the door. All right, and so because the guy wants to open the door and she does not want to open the door, there's conflict. No matter how you interpret it, there's still conflict. All right? She doesn't want to open the door. He wants to open the door. There's differing opinions, and when there's differing opinions, there is conflict. And we're going to pick up in verse 6. Finally, she decides, after reasoning, in verse 6, it says this, I opened for my beloved, but my beloved had left. He was gone. My heart sank at his departure. I looked for him, but did not find him. I called him, but he did not answer. The watchmen found me, and they made their rounds in the city. They beat me and bruised me. They took away my cloak, those watchmen of the walls. Daughters of Jerusalem, I charge you, if you find my beloved, what will you tell him? Tell him, I am faint with love. So finally she decides, all right, fine. Only to find out that her husband is gone. And no matter how you interpret the first part of chapter 5, for the first several verses, as she is reasoning and he is knocking, and whatever that looks like, she finally decides to open the door. However, her husband is gone. He disappears. You see, friends, absence steps in when attention is not given. Absence steps in when attention is not given. Now, I want to be real clear in teaching this. What I'm not saying is that you just need to give your spouse whatever they want. That's not what I'm teaching. However, there should be a desire to pay attention to your spouse. There should be a desire for communication. There should be a desire to learn them. There should be a desire to talk in the middle of the day or at the end of the day. You should pay attention to interests, even if they don't interest you. There should be a desire to spend time with one another. You should pay attention to your spouse. This past week in our small group, we were talking about the questions from last week. And we kind of rabbit trailed a little bit in our conversation. And one of the things that we talked about in our small group was the things that can easily distract us. And what I noticed is that most of the things that we came up with weren't bad things. Like, we didn't come up with this list of all these terrible things that, we can do to distract us from our spouse. You know what the number one thing that we came up with was? Kids. Kids. It wasn't some terrible sin. We didn't, we weren't talking about going and killing someone. Oh, that distracts me from my spouse. No. It wasn't some terrible thing like that. It was ball games and tournaments and club meetings. None of them bad. However, when they take priority over your spouse, absence will grow. Friends, I wish I could communicate it more clearly. But here's the truth, is that if you have kids in your home right now, your kids are not your first ministry. They are not, your spouse is. Your kids are not what is most important in your home. Your spouse is. Because if you have the best relationship with your kids and you give them all the opportunities for sports and clubs and everything like that, but yet your husband or your wife walks away from you, your kids will be damaged for the rest of their life. There will be wounds that will not heal if you leave your home or your spouse leaves your home. The most important thing that you can give your kids is not another trip to the ball diamond, but is a loving marriage that they can watch and they can observe and they can learn from, and then they can replicate one day. That's the best thing that you could ever give your kids. Please do not allow your kids, listen, I love my kids, but in no way do I ever want my kids to come between me and Emily. Emily is what's most important, and the better that I love her, the more she will be able to love our kids, and that I will be able to love our kids. If you're a student or kid in the room, you're not what's most important in your home. Do not try to divide your parents and pull them in opposite directions. Because I guarantee you, you not getting your way is better than one of your parents not being there. When it comes to your marriage, pay attention to your spouse. Don't become so busy with all of the other to-dos that you forget what's most important. Even here. Listen, today, if you didn't see when you came in, today's our Fusion Fair. It's the biggest opportunity we have every year for you to sign up and serve, to get involved in the church. But I want to be clear. Before you volunteer for anything at church, before you volunteer to spend time here, pour into people here, before you volunteer to do anything here, take care of your spouse at home. I will always rather you have a good marriage than be busy at church. I want you to serve, but the first place to serve is at home. If we don't pay attention at home, absence will step in. And if we don't pay attention for long enough, absence will step in the form of a close friend that wants to listen and pay attention. Absence will step in the form of a coworker that wants to talk during lunch break, day in and day out. They want to build you up. Absence will step in the form of pornography and rob your heart of the joys that God designs. And what happens is when absence steps in the form of a coworker and a good friend and pornography, then all of a sudden you are stuck in a comparison. And when a comparison happens, what you do is you put your spouse up against everybody else in the world. And I mean, we even see it a little bit here in chapter 5, verse 9. As the woman has spoken to the other women around, as the wife has said, daughters of Jerusalem, I charge you, if you find my beloved, what will you tell him? Tell him I am faint with love. And they respond with this: how is your beloved better than others? In other words, how does he compare? What is it that sets him apart? Most beautiful of women. How is your beloved better than others that you so charge us? So what is it that sets him apart? How have you compared him to everything else that we should look for him? And then later on in chapter 6, verse 8, it says 60 queens there may be, and 80 concubines, and virgins beyond number. And I know in chapter 6, he is saying, listen, you stand out against all of these other women that are around me. But there's still a comparison. I mean, ladies, I'm not going to ask you to show your hands. Okay, but how many of us would absolutely fall head over heels for our husband that comes home and says, out of the 80 women I've slept with this week, you're the best? Right? Like, that's probably not going to be like, oh, I love you so much, right? That's going to end in a right hook and a pool of blood on the floor probably, you know? I mean, that's not terms of endearment. And I mean, that's basically what he's saying. Listen, out of all of these women, I mean, that's what a concubine is. Out of all these women that I have slept with, you catch my attention more than the rest. No. Pay attention to your spouse to where they don't have to compare you against the rest of the world. Your spouse should know that you matter more than anything, that they matter more than anything. When it comes to conflict, whether it's conflict in your marriage, or maybe it's just conflict with your parents, maybe it is conflict with your good friend, or maybe a roommate, we are faced with two options when it comes to conflict. We can either react or we can respond. Now, what does that mean? If we react, okay, it's quick. All right, someone says something we don't like, we react. We jump in, we lash out. Our voice raises, we get louder, we get angry. And when we react, we are filled with pride and anger and a desire to be right. When we react, we don't often think about what we're saying. Words just kind of come out of our mouth because what we have done is we've built a defense in our head as they were talking of all of the ways that they're wrong. And as soon as they stop talking, we more or less vomit our reaction on them. It doesn't mean it's right, but we think that we're right. And we react with hurtful words because our goal is to win. You know what I've never heard? When it comes to my marriage, marriages that I'm close to, any marriage counseling, you know what I've never had a couple say? I've never had a spouse or anybody say, you know what? I thought that I was wrong until you raised your voice and yelled at me. And when that happened, everything became clear and I totally understood what you were saying. Like, I've never heard that happen. You know, maybe you're the lucky one in the world. I've never heard of when we yelled at each other and screamed at each other, it brought so much clarity to our relationship. I love you more. You know, like that conversation doesn't normally happen. It's because it's filled with reactions that where we're not thinking and we're just spewing hateful words. A lot of times we can see this on social media, reactions, instant, no thought. Someone says something we don't like, we disagree with, boom, we type something out, and then it's there for everybody to see. And most of the time, we're in the wrong. You see, reactions are oftentimes filled with hatred. And so we can react, or we can respond. A response has some logic to it. A response has some thought to it. And what a response does, more than a reaction does, a response says, I may disagree with you, but I love you in the process. If you're married in the room, how different is your conflict if you know that your spouse loves you all the way through it and is not just trying to win an argument? If there is a response, even if there's differing opinions to where you say, you matter, you are loved, there's a logical conversation that happens. We sit down and we process things through. And more than anything else in a response, there is forgiveness. The desire is not to be right. It's to forgive and to resolve. You see, reaction and response is drastically different when it comes to conflict. If you're in a room and the door is locked and you have two options, there is a bucket of water or a jug of gasoline and a fire starts. A reaction picks up the gas, throws it on the fire, and tries to find a way out. That's a reaction. A response picks up the bucket of water, dumps it on the fire, and then makes sure that the fire is out. You see, a reaction just tries to get away and oftentimes fuels it. A response puts it out and resolves it. If you're married in the room and you are currently looking to win your marriage, you've already lost. Because our truth for this morning is this. Our goal in marriage is to be one, not to be right. Our goal in marriage is to be one, not to be right. Your marriage is not a battle to win. It's a relationship to cultivate. And if our goal entirely is to always be right and to win, then we're missing it. If we claim that we're followers of Jesus, well, at the center of our claim is the gospel message of Jesus. And at the center of the gospel is forgiveness. At the center of the message of Jesus coming to this earth to forgive us, to put himself on a cross where we deserved, is forgiveness. Which means at the center of your marriage needs to be forgiveness. If we're followers of Jesus, the center of our friendships needs to be forgiveness. The center of our relationship with our parents needs to be forgiveness. If we have allowed grudges and loneliness to define our relationships and our marriage, then we have forgotten to invite Jesus into it. We've forgotten to invite him into those relationships because, friends, Jesus doesn't demonstrate a love that walks away. Jesus doesn't demonstrate a love that leaves someone alone. When Jesus came to this earth, he didn't say, okay, I'm here and then I'm out. As soon as things get hard, I'm leaving. Oh, you did sin. I'm out. No. He says, because of your mistakes, I'm here. Because of your secrets, I'm present. Because of your sin, I love you. He doesn't demonstrate a love that leaves us alone. He doesn't say, oh, you sinned. It'd be better if you're by yourself. No, Jesus' words are an invitation. Because he's present and because he's involved, he says, if you are tired and beat up, I want you to come to me. If your marriage is struggling, I want you to come to me. If you're broken inside, I want you to come to me. And I'm not going to walk away. I'm not going to leave you alone. I want you to come close. I want your weariness, and I want your brokenness, and I want your conflict. And I want to give you rest. I don't want you to fight all the time. I don't want you to battle all the time. I want you to know that you're forgiven, that you matter, you have purpose, and that you are loved. And I want you to communicate that to your spouse. Friends, if we're married in the room, is our greater pursuit to be one with our spouse or to be right? Are we fighting harder for our spouse's heart or for our reasoning to be the top dog at home? At the center of our relationships, whether we're married or not, is the center of our relationships forgiveness. Because if we follow Jesus, at the center of our relationship with him is forgiveness. Which means if we are to follow her, means that we learn and then replicate. Which means we hand forgiveness off to others. Is forgiveness at the center of your relationship? Are we mirroring the example of Jesus, of him coming to this world for us, to others, to the person closest to us, to the relationship that should matter the most? When it comes to those of us that are married in the room, what we should care about more than anything else is to be one, not to be right. If we're not married in the room, forgiveness should be the definition of our relationships more than anything else. Why don't we go ahead and stand together? We're going to worship and we're going to sing together a song that maybe many of us have sung, maybe we haven't. A song that speaks of the brokenness and the weariness. It speaks of in the middle of conflict when you feel like you're beat up. When you maybe start to question where's the door instead of how I put out the fire. I recognize in the middle of all of that God is present and that he's good. That even in the worst moments of my marriage, that God wants something better. Even if I have walked out the door, Jesus wants to bring healing. These words were written in the middle of tragedy years and years ago, but speak volumes to what our attitude as followers of Jesus should be in the middle of conflict. Conflict is going to happen. It's going to happen. There's no way around it. But in the middle of it, will we run after the things that matter to Jesus most? Forgiveness, grace, and love. Or will we run after things that matter most to us? Being right and winning. Conflict is going to happen. The question is, in the middle of it, who will we trust in and how will we respond? Let's sing together.